Hello and welcome back to the Good Leader podcast. I'm Will Vanderhart.
I'm Will James.
And we are so privileged to have Camilla here. Camilla Footit, welcome. We're going to call you Miller, which is, the way he likes to go, but we're so excited and we're so grateful for you to join us on the podcast today. We've known each other now for several years. Actually, I've known your husband James since university in Oxford and tracked your story. And now my daughter's friends with your son. Yeah. So I feel like we're really connected and Will's known you for years as well. So it's super nice to have a friend on the podcast, but you're also someone that we've really admired in leadership. And I know you would find that kind of difficult and awkward, but you have really, you've done this A to B to C in business, and not many people are kind of founder leaders with a success story. So just tell us a bit about your leadership journey and particularly the formation of Higgidy, which was really your flagship business. We'd love to sort of introduce our viewers to that story.
Gosh, it is. I mean, I don't know what other people would say about leadership, but I don't think you ever feel that you sort of qualified for being a leader. I don't think you sort of go to uni or go and get the degree in leadership. You just find yourself, if you make yourself available, being in a place of leadership. And I think that's what happened to me with Higgidy, really. So very, very short version of my sort of CV, but I left school without qualification, so to speak, and I didn't go to university and learnt to cook. And you find, my cooking days and different jobs taught me a little bit about leadership. You have to just step in and shape the kitchen, the team that's available, the people that you're working with. But my more recent, so the last 20 years, has been running and leading Higgidy. So, and Higgidy is a business that I formed with my husband and a friend of his from uni. And it makes pies, quiches and sausage rolls. We have sold it now, so I'm not the owner of it now, but for 20 years led that business. So, and that was my journey of really forming and understanding and finding myself in this position of leadership. And at the point at which we sold it, we had about 350 people working for us. And the business, because it supplied pies and sausage rolls and quiches to supermarkets, it was 24/7. So there was never a moment where that business was closed. We were kind of on 365 days of the year.
Can I say what delicious pies and quiches and sausage rolls they are? We've both really enjoyed them, and we've seen that journey. And I remember talked to James about the journey early on. Now, no one goes from being a cook in the kitchen to running a business of 350 people cost free. That is a unbelievable progression. We both work in business coaching with businesses that are a lot smaller than that in terms of the volume of employees. That's a huge learning journey, and it's never a bell curve, is it? Just give us a little bit of a breakdown of what you'd say were the sort of core stages from inception to when you first thought, actually, we're going to take on our first few employees. And what was your kind of thinking around whether you could scale Higgidy from your kitchen into our kitchens?
Yeah, I think I often get sort of asked that question, and I think I think there was a level of naivety about it, which on one hand I think is quite good. It is, because I think with James we sort of thought, we can do this, and didn't really realise quite what we were letting ourselves in for. So I think on one level there is that kind of like, I don't know what it's going to take, but we're going to have a go. And I think that is a hallmark of both an entrepreneur and a leader, is you don't necessarily know the cost, but you're prepared to kind of go for it. But I think one of the things that I would say is that I think it's an African proverb or African saying, which is go fast and go alone, or go far and go together. And I think one of the hallmarks of our journey has been friendship and going with people and not going alone. Now, it might mean that it's a bit bumpier and it might mean that it's slower, but I know that the journey of friends, so it was me and my husband and then Mark, our colleague, the three of us going together was what sustained us over the 20 years. So we were sort of friends in the business, and then we had friends outside the business. And I think about, that great cloud of witnesses that are kind of cheering you on. Like, we had people who would say, we're kind of so for you. And that was something that sustained us on that inception, but all the way through the 20 years. So the friendship piece was huge, and people that come and talk to me about that kind of, I've got this idea for, I'm going to say, a jam business, and it's in my kit. I'm interested in who they're doing it with and who they're partnering with and what does that look like, because I think you can go further with friends.
And there's been moments, of course, where that really bites, particularly when the product's not going as well as you hoped, or the finances are difficult. I know we've had a conversation about a point at which you really were just out of money.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people underestimate the on-ramp to a successful business and the kind of the lag time between inception and profitability. You found yourself in quite a sticky point at one time. You said you'd had to sort of pretty much sell the family silver to keep the business alive. Tell us a bit about that pressure.
Yeah, I think there is an extraordinary pressure in running a commercial business and having it to sustain itself. So we didn't take any outside investment, but we also, it got very hairy. I think when we were in the early days of starting it, we spoke to somebody who was a bit further on than we were at the time, and he said, you can put all your eggs in one basket and guard them with your life. And what we took from that is that it is okay to absolutely put your shoulder behind something, but we could do it also in the knowledge that we felt that our Heavenly Father had it, and whatever that looked like, it was going to be okay. Now that we did get to the point where there was one moment where we had to sell the car to pay the wages. So, but somehow we were okay with that because of a deep sense of that. I think that God had it and had our lives. It was harder looking out when we had to speak to our team. Actually, that was the hardest, having to hold our nerve and hold our strategy and hold our position. It was almost easier. We didn't mind the risk, but looking out at the team were harder moments. But our faith and the friendships sustained us in those moments.
I think that's really, you've answered I think what's really interesting for me is I sensed, and knowing a bit more of your story than just where we are, that your leadership's been very oriented around the care of your staff, which you've just touched on there, not just your friendship with Mark and obviously your partnership with your husband, but actually a deep-seated care of the people who you employed. Initially, I remember you grew a factory from quite a small team of 16, and then you grew it up into a larger and larger and larger enterprise. But to what degree would you align your success as a business with your care of the people who are in your business?
I do. Well, I think there are a number of things like that. We found that yes, we like making pies. We did, and I'm a foodie and a cook, and I'm a cook. James is an architect, and Mark an aid worker. But what we found in that was that the thing that we loved was employing people. We actually loved the journey with the team almost more than the pie itself, and so in the difficult moments, I think we could all, if I sort of linked arms, that we were in the trenches together, and so we spent sometimes when the business didn't grow, which it didn't. We had years when we didn't see growth and we didn't see profitability, but the time we put in with our team was as important. And I think that made us more sustainable and more able to go through the difficult times. And actually, I was thinking about it as I was walking here. One of the things that we did a lot of was eat together. And I think there's something very powerful about taking time to, let's call it, break bread together. And there were different moments at different. So when we were 16, we had I think it was a sort of pudding Wednesday or something, and people could bring in a pudding, and we had pudding together on a Wednesday. I mean, there was sort of. But then when we were 350, it looked different. We had something called the Higgidy picnic, and that was once a year, and everybody that was employed by Higgidy could invite their families, their partners and their kids and their grannies and their aunts, and we would come together and we would eat and celebrate. But so at different moments, we took a lot of time out to make sure that we were around a table, to eat together. And I think that builds culture and loyalty and community, so that when those moments come where you're having the sole card to pay the wages, somehow it's okay. I think.
I'm thinking about the challenge to live your values, and obviously having been able to see a little bit of behind the scenes footage. I remember meeting you guys years ago, and you were wrestling around. Do you increase car parking capacity, or do you become open to outsourcing more production, which meant that you weren't going to get as much contact time with staff and things like that. And this idea of like wanting to be able to invest in people. How did you develop your kind of core values together, that you were like, these are the things that we stand for and that we will pay a cost to sort of hold on to? How did you do that working as a little team?
I think that one, we developed them with the business, so it wasn't something that Mark and myself and James came up with. This was an exercise that we did across the business over a long period of time, and we had these three values: be brave, be kind, be smart. And they all had a whole load of values under there, and then there was a whole set of behaviours. But those they were created or crafted by our team. And they were such good measures, because when we did appraisals, when we talked, even when we came to have difficult moments where that we had to say, perhaps it's time for you to move on, there were ways of doing that in a way that was both brave and smart and kind. And we had a language as well, a shared language. So, but also, Mark and myself and James, we cared about different things. I think that helped as well. So not that we could hide behind one another, but we could play to each other's strengths in a way. So yeah, I think those have gone on, and they've gone on beyond us, and they were as important to us as making the pie. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it sort of feels like the human part, the human leadership stuff, and that's good business. You know, that actually the good business is values, the good business is the culture you've created. And whilst you love cooking and looking at lovely pies, you could have been producing something else as a good, but the actual development of the team is the development of the business as much as it is the product.
And I think you know, there's we could have outsourced the making of the product, but we didn't. We wanted to make good product, but we really wanted to build that team and journey together and be in the trenches. And we would sometimes have in meetings, almost, our leadership team packing sausage rolls, so that we were all sharing in the kind of the direction of travel. I don't know. it is something that we're as proud of as the product.
It's a form of communion you're
Yeah.
describing,
Yeah.
breaking bread,
Yeah,
being in unity, co-labouring,
yeah,
and out of that flowed a sort of sense of a shared vision, shared values, that even when you were letting someone go,
yeah,
was almost agreed that actually for the sake of
yeah.
the values that you all believed in, that was okay.
Yeah, I think actually I remembered one of the things I was going to say. I think there is something enormously satisfying as well when you can see a meeting going on and you're not in it, and the people in the meeting know the values, but they're also better at that particular task. Or so I think of like technical. I mean, I'm absolutely hopeless at technical, which is all around the kind of food safety, and I'm not really. I mean, everything that came out of Higgidy was safe, but it wasn't safe because of me. It was a brilliant food safety team, but seeing and equipping people who are better at the job than you, but also share the same values, that's a really releasing moment. And it also means that the business can go on and is sustainable beyond us.
Yeah.
And
we want to talk a bit about now about sustainable leadership, particularly because 20 years is a long time, and it's easy for us to say, oh, I remember when you started that business, and now you've sold the business. You're still involved in the business to a degree, aren't you?
Yes.
As
Consultant.
a consultant level. So, but it's easy for us from the outside to think about a beginning and an end. In a sense, inception to sale is the sort of journey. 20 years is a lifetime of work.
Yeah.
Were there moments when it felt too much?
Yeah, there were, but I think that one of the things that in the too much is that if you get really focused on the end goal, it becomes overwhelming. But if it's not about the destination, it's more about the day-to-day and the journey, and James and I did have those days where it was one foot in front of the other. Come on, it's one, but it's not as overwhelming as this kind of, and if there's a measure or a sense that it has to be successful, or now it has to be profitable to go on, because you need it's not going to go on if you can't make money. But in the gloomy days, it was more about the journey than it was about this destination and getting to the end. We didn't know whether we would sell it. It wasn't, when people asked us that question, after 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, we weren't actually clear. Now we did, and that was an extraordinary moment, but it wasn't the goal. And I think that is where, if you're looking to this end moment or this marker, that you can get caught up and think, I'm not measuring up to it, or that's not success, or
Such a helpful perspective. I think really so almost like taking so sustainable leadership for you is largely about taking day to day. And then finding the joy in the moment, and then
and having fun. Like, you have to have a laugh. Like, is and because otherwise you don't want to be miserable on this journey. Like, so we did enjoy it in the days that were difficult, and there were years we would get to the end of a year, and if you looked at our P&L, it would have looked healthier if we hadn't got out of bed for a whole year and hadn't made a single pie. So there were years that were very tricky. But in that, we had employed people, and we had broken bread together, and there were Higgidy marriages and Higgidy babies and all those things, and they were good, even though we hadn't actually made money. But they were, they were.
You're making other things, right? You're making a supply chain. You're making employees who are more skilled. You're making a reputation. You're building all of the invisible things that actually have real value.
Yeah.
So interesting, really powerful.
Yeah, I do think that just that in those gloomy moments, there's a difference between bumps in the roads, and but then you sort of the strategy, you sort of hold the line, and then bigger bumps where you actually have to pivot. And I think leaders, you have to be able to call it when there's a difference between the kind of, I know the strategy, I know what we're trying to do, let's just hold the line, and moments where you go, oh my gosh, that is an epic fail, and failure's okay, let's just name it, and we need to sort of change direction. And we had those moments. Right. So, yeah.
I'm wondering, to fast forward slightly.
Yes.
Like so you've now transitioned, you've gone through a transition into, there was sort of in Higgidy, and now you're in this sort of beyond space.
Yeah.
Coming back to this idea of sustainable leadership, what have you found helpful in sustaining you through that period of transition? Because transitions, lots of people, we all find change challenging, but transition, especially when you've been in a role for quite a period of time, our identity can end up quite connected with that. What have you found helpful through this transition?
Gosh, that's a really good question. And I think if you'd asked me a year ago, I almost would have gone like, I don't know how to answer that. But in this last year, so this last 12 months, I have really, really committed with a few friends, and both in our, and followed a kind of, a sort of set of Bible readings and rhythms, daily rhythms. And through that commitment and that checking in and those rhythms, it's created a sort of structure which has sustained me and made me have a perspective. And I've been able to be honest about the highs and the lows. And in that, I've been able to make a transition out. But I think if I hadn't had the commitment of a few friends, the commitment to pray every day, the commitment to have some rhythms that I haven't found easy, without that, I think I would have found this transition harder. I think there's also has to be a letting go. The business that I left is being run by other people, and they have a different strategy and a different agenda, and you just have to allow that to happen. Does that sort of...
I think it is really super helpful, and I kind of almost want to underline as well some of what you're saying, because transitions are, I think, by virtue of them being a transition, challenging, and they question our identity, and we have all kind of coping mechanisms, and we have rhythms and routines that made life work through a season, and we need to recognize that things are changing. And I feel like what you have named in that is, you've said, well, I've kind of been proactive, or one way or another, I have set up a different kind of holding pattern, or a different kind of structure that has served me through this period. And I think that's a really useful takeaway for people listening. Actually, if you see that there's a threshold moment, which could be as anything from we're having a first child, or I'm getting married, or I'm entering a new job, or I'm leaving a job, actually to think about how are we going to create new structures to hold change and to hold us through change is really helpful.
And they have been for me, and so I think I find myself, and it's quite releasing as well, because I also think, through the kind of whole leading Higgidy and then into the change that I'm in now, one of the things that I think leaders have to do is learn to say no a lot, and that's been a learning. I think we learned that you have to say no more than you have to say yes. And I'm in that time now as well, where you're working out kind of what does life look like. But it's more about no's than it is about yeses, which is a funny place to be, but also it creates space, and that is a good thing. It's not a scary thing.
We are sort of moving towards the end of our time together, but one of the things that you're marked out by, and one of the things that people, when we mention your name to anyone, or when we encounter you in different settings, is you're someone we believe is marked out by joy. And that is quite an unusual thing. You know, you're a very, very senior businesswoman. You've done an amazing job. I know you've started new businesses, not just the one we've talked about. You're a social entrepreneur. yet there's this levity to you, there's a sort of a joy to you that doesn't matter where we see you pop up, whether it's serving on our church camping trip and you're feeding 150 of us every day, or whether you're in a business meeting, there's some energy of joy which is quite infectious for people. We can even feel it here in this sort of meeting. Tell us about it. Where does it come from, and how does it keep you going?
I don't know. I don't think my children would say that. I think they would have a different view, and they'd be like, "Mum, why are you so stressed?" But I think that is, again, it comes back to that deep-rooted sense of who I am in Christ and how He sees me, and being able to just trust that. And I think there were, in my late teens and into my early 20s, there were years where I really wrestled with that, where that was a harder word, or I wouldn't have been able to access that. I think doesn't it say, consider it pure joy when you face trials and tribulation? But I think that He does give us joy. Our faith and that journey sustains. And I think that sense of who we are in Christ, that sense of belonging, is what has enabled me to be freer and held my hands more open. So that would be I think where it comes from. Yeah,
that's a beautiful way of describing it. Thank you, and thank you for being with us today. You've really I feel like we need more conversations with Camilla. Thank you for joining us today on this week's edition of the Good Leader podcast. I'm Will Vanderhart.
I'm Will James.